Thank you very much, Tim. And it's my pleasure to represent our terrific company and the wonderful people behind Emyria this afternoon. Emyria is a company that's developing new medical treatments for patients with unmet needs, but we're doing that with a really unique approach. We're actually guiding our programs by the patient data from patients that we provide care for across our medical service subsidiary. Go to the next slide, please. So what that looks like in practice is that we have operations in 5 different jurisdictions around Australia. We have now treated more than 6,000 patients. Each of those patients has a clinical condition that's not responding to usual treatment. And in the aggregate, that's 40 different unmet needs that we are providing care for patients as young as 2 and as old as 98. And by paying careful attention to how those patients are doing on treatment, we're able to build an incredible data asset that guides our drug development programs. And we've launched 2 to date, and I'll speak about those today. Next slide, please. So our primary programs are running in 2 main streams. We have an ultra-pure cannabinoid drug development program. We've developed a unique dose form, EMD RX5, which we think has potential to address multiple different clinical indications. And we're starting with a major unmet need of psychological distress and seeking registration in Australia as an over-the-counter medication. We also have an incredible asset in a library of more than 100 MDMA analogs. MDMA may be known to some of you as ecstasy. It's been shown to be an incredibly profound treatment when given alongside psychotherapy for major mental health disorders. And we believe that by examining this library, looking for new ways to adjust that molecule, we can come up with next generation psychedelic assisted therapies and also new treatments for neurological disorders as well. Next slide, please. So first of all, our cannabinoid development. Next slide. As I mentioned, we have this incredible data set that's guiding our program. We treat a wide variety of patients with a wide variety of treatment regimes. And so we have this exquisite insight into what doses are working for which problems and in which patient cohorts. And it's those insights that allow us to design a registration program, pick an indication, craft a clinical trial program that can achieve registration with major global regulators. And each of those primary indications represents an unmet need. Each of those conditions represents an opportunity for a standalone drug development program. And we believe we're really uniquely positioned to take advantage of that and develop treatments that can improve the lives and well-being of many, many patients around the world. Next slide, please. But one of the key things we're focused on is developing a reliable and consistent dose form. 40% of our medications that we take today, at least in the top few that are prescribed, drew their inspiration from plants. So if you're taking a statin to lower your cholesterol, that molecule was first isolated in a fungus. If you've ever taken an antibiotic, for example, you may be aware that, of course, that came from in a study of a penicillin mold. Aspirin was first isolated from the bark of a willow tree. But of course, today we're not taking teas of willow bark to help our pain. We're not eating mushrooms to try and bring our cholesterol down. If we're taking a medicine, we're taking a reliable, consistent, high quality dose form. In the world of medicinal cannabis, we're still kind of stuck at this 2.0 phase. We recognize that there may be a value to medicinal cannabis, but people are still taking it as tinctures, mixtures of oils, gel caps. We think the next evolution is coming. That's medicinal cannabis 3.0. And what we'll see is dose forms that we are familiar with in reliable, high quality, consistent forms. Next slide, please. Great. So we've actually taken the approach to look at a synthetic CBD. So this isn't just about extracting the CBD out of plants. This is making it in a true biopharmaceutical process. Through that method, we can ensure an incredible quality in the CBD that we're using, with absolutely no detectable THC, which is the psychoactive component of the marijuana plant. And you can see on the right there that even in the highest quality registered medical treatment, there is still small quantities of THC present. We're also ensuring that we're only using the biochemically active component of CBD with very few other impurities. Our technologies also allowed us to increase the bioavailability of our drug form. Bioavailability is a measure of how much treatment actually makes its way into the bloodstream so it can be effective. CBD is notorious for having very low and poor bioavailability. And so innovations that can improve that count for a lot. And we think we've got a terrific way of delivering CBD to increase its bioavailability. And in the long term, we believe the synthetic approach will allow us to have cost advantages as well. Next slide, please. And the one after this. So our first program is EMD RX5. It's focused on psychological distress, and we're seeking registration as an over-the-counter treatment. Psychological distress is a cluster of symptoms. It can result in sleep disturbance, anxiety, stress, depression. Affects about 15% of us. And we know the incidence is growing, particularly given what we've endured in the last couple of years. And currently, there is no over-the-counter treatment for this condition. Next slide, please. We also know that huge recognition globally for the mental health crisis. President Biden, a couple of days ago, next slide, please, called out mental health as being a major priority of his administration, announcing huge funding for this and recognizing that many adults now are reporting symptoms of anxiety and depression. So we believe an effective, proven treatment to ameliorate the short-term symptoms of anxiety and psychological distress has tremendous upside. Next slide, please, and tremendous value. So what does that look like? We think an over-the-counter medicine is possible. The TGA has allowed CBD at certain doses to be available over the counter once registration's been achieved, and that allows this treatment to be available to patients without a medical prescription. And with a huge network of pharmacies around Australia, we think this represents a massive market opportunity, and really it's a stepping stone to bigger and greater markets for us, as all of our program has been designed to meet the requirements of the FDA and other major global regulators as well. Next slide, please. So how do we get to this? So just to show off how we were able to come up with this insight, we had more than 600 patients taking a low-dose form for psychological distress. We're able to see how they were responding. We're able to define that population to get a good idea of which patients were responding most effectively to that treatment regime. And then through that, develop not only a unique dose form, but also selected the indication, the pivotal registration study program, and we're making progress on that program now. Next slide, please. We can do this again. So just having a look at the progress today. This is a technical slide. I'll let people probably read this in the downloadable version that's available on the ASX. Needless to say, we've taken a very sophisticated approach to our drug manufacture to ensure that it would meet the strictest requirements for registration, not only at the TGA, but the FDA also. Important to note out that our ethics approval for our phase 1 study was granted yesterday, and we can start that dosing and recruitment later this month. Next slide, please. Great. Here's a little slide on the bioavailability advantages. What this is a measure of our drug distribution in the bloodstream in a gold standard animal model that we just completed. And you can see the comparison there between the only registered medicine, Epidiolex, which in and of itself is a multi-$100 million a year medication. And the manufacturer of that medication was sold to Jazz Pharmaceuticals for $7 billion in February last year. You can see that we outperform that drug in terms of bioavailability, which means more of the active ingredient is delivered to the bloodstream where it can be useful. And we think this is going to have a huge impact in the patients that we provide this treatment to also. Next slide, please. Great. So what can we do next? We can look at our data. We can look for additional indications, additional opportunities for EMD RX5, and develop programs for those. Our data also guides us to new combination treatments as well, where we can look at novel medications combining CBD and THC. And of course, as I mentioned, 40 different clinical indications available and responding to treatment. And so we can design custom programs for each of those markets and build out a pretty impressive portfolio of treatments for major unmet needs. Next slide, please. And here's a timeline. I'll just say here that trials are about to commence. We'll commence our pivotal clinical trials soon after our phase 1, later in the Q2, and look to submit to the TGA for registration approval by end of the year. Next slide, please. And one of the other areas that we're developing, thank you, is psychedelic assisted treatments. So these are the administration of things like psilocybin or MDMA alongside trained, experienced psychotherapists. And clinical trials are showing that this is having tremendous, profound benefit on patients with really difficult major mental health disorders. And consequently, there's a massive amount of investment happening in this space. And we think we're uniquely positioned to lead, not only because of the way we've set up our business with clinical care services, which are providing frontline care, the incredible data capture we're doing, but also our ability to develop new treatments. Next slide, please. One of the really key assets we have, next slide, thank you, is an MDMA analog library, which we have an exclusive access to in partnership with the University of Western Australia. This is a library that's been growing over 15 years. It is still growing. There are more than 100 different MDMA-like compounds. These are compounds inspired by the original MDMA, but adjusted slightly to elicit hopefully different positive therapeutic effects. And we're currently screening and testing that library for new compounds. And we think it has tremendous potential, not only to become next generation MDMA for it to assist therapy and allow more patients to have benefit from that treatment, but also we see opportunity for these treatments to become typical mainstream medicines for neurological disorders as well. Next slide, please. And then one after this. So we're also involved in some really incredible research, including a trial that is in planning, and we expect to kick off this year, looking at MDMA for PTSD, where we're also layering in remote monitoring technology to get a better sense of how the patient's faring to help guide therapists through these sessions. Next slide, please. And it's this kind of research that we have the privilege of being able to do, and the unique access through our clinics, our physicians, and our patients can help build really unique insights, and that supports some of our intellectual property as well. You can see we have a growing portfolio of patents that support our programs, our dose development, and our innovations. Next slide, please. So quickly on the corporate structure, tremendous board who's done this before. We've got FDA approvals on our record. I'd like to just touch on two people, Dr. Karen Smith, ex-Chief Medical Officer and Global Head of Research and Development at Jazz Pharmaceuticals. The company I mentioned acquired GW for $7 billion. Also Matt Callahan with 4 FDA approvals in the area of pain medications in the United States. And with his experience, these experts are guiding our team and all of our registration programs as well. Next slide, thank you. Also like to point out here that we have a really tight registry. We have great support from major institutional investor in Tatarang. That's the private wealth fund for the Forrest family. Recently provided $5 million. Gives us a very strong cash balance sheet, 8.7 million at the end of last year. Next slide, thank you. And finally, just to recap 6 key points of why we think we're a terrific investment and worth betting on. We have this great board and management team who've done this kind of thing before. We've got incredible assets in the form of our data that's guiding our drug development programs, targeting major unmet needs that are globally significant. We've got a really unique cannabinoid dosing platform and dose form, which we think can serve multiple indications. Got this tremendous library of MDMA analogs with huge potential. And all of that, I think, gives us a very attractive valuation and a lot of upside ahead in the years to come. Thank you very much. Welcome your questions.
Thank you, Michael. I do remember your presentation from last time. It's a shame I wasn't a shareholder. Now, you have raised some capital through Twiggy Forrest, the family office. How do you balance this capital allocation with, the need to get regulatory approval, trials, and research?
Yeah, clinical trials and drug development is a very long and expensive process. So you need to be really strategic in how you're allocating your capital to de-risk the program as you go. And so, each of our programs is essentially sequenced and staged with various value-creating gates. First one being for RX5, for example, the phase 1 trial, which is all fully funded, and also our phase 3 study. And I think the successes in those will allow us to show the potential that we have, raise additional funds to support our other programs coming in parallel.
And how confident are you in this question here in terms of your timeline to have sales by the end of 2022?
Yeah, the wrinkle there is really how long the TGA will take to consider it. They've not approved a Schedule 3 medication in the cannabis field before. They allow themselves a generous timeline, somewhere between 100 to 240 days to make an approval. And so that's probably the big unknown here. But we're on track to get our phase 1 done very rapidly. Our phase 3 will follow. And we also think we can do that incredibly quickly. So I'm confident we'll have a submission well before the end of the year. And then really up to the TGA on when they can approve it. The very best case scenario would be the end of the year or likely early next year.
And does this synthetic cannabis product, is that treated any differently from a natural cannabis product in terms of trial approval and regulations?
It's not actually. In at least the early conversations we've had, there's some comfort from regulators in a synthetic. It's a known entity. It's got known pharmacokinetic profile. It's a known chemical entity. Regulators are more cautious of plant extracts where you can control some of the cannabinoid elements, but not others. And so you have to have some tolerance for other things that might appear in the medication. So we know that for a fact that the FDA is incredibly strict on the CBD purity levels. Synthetic allows us to hit that easily. I think it's more difficult for extraction companies to hit the purity level that the FDA is seeking. The TJ is a little more tolerant, but still I think generally the attitude is that regulators approve of synthetic approaches, given that we can control more of the variables in the medication.
And the FDA, where do you see yourself positioned in regards to that timeline? We all understand that that's a slow process. It's hard to give a confident deadline, but where are you positioned there?
Well, we're already doing the hard work right now, picking the indication. We want to make smart moves towards the FDA. We've got, again, a long list of indications that we think are all potentially suitable drug development programs focused on the US. But absolutely, we're seeing through the TJ approval, which we hope to achieve end of this year, early next year, towards the FDA, and making sure that everything we do is additive towards an FDA submission program as well. But I expect that in the next few months, we'll be approaching the FDA with some of our programs in mind, and we'll be able to talk more freely about those in the coming months. But we're absolutely focused on FDA as the long-term play for our drug registration programs across everything we do.
Thanks, Michael. That's all we have time for. Nice to have you back. Love to see you again in 6 months or so.
Right. Thanks, Tim. Cheers. Appreciate it.
Thank you.